The moment I saw her, I understood everything my family had spent generations building was designed to keep me blind. Blind to what was real. Blind to what mattered. Blind to the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of old money and make every diamond in it look like costume jewelry. Her name was Solène. She arrived at Mercer Estate on a Thursday afternoon in early October, when the oak trees had just started surrendering their leaves to the wind. I remember because I was standing at my father's study window, avoiding another lecture about legacy and responsibility and all the hollow words rich men use to control their sons. A taxi pulled up to the service entrance. Not a town car, not a private driver. A yellow taxi with a dented bumper and a driver who looked confused about why anyone would willingly come to this place. She stepped out carrying everything she owned in a single worn leather bag. The kind of bag that tells you someone has moved too many times to collect things that do not matter. The kind of bag that tells you someone knows exactly what they need and nothing more. My mother had 17 Louis Vuitton trunks in her closet. She had never used most of them. Solène had one bag, and somehow, standing there in the gravel driveway with the afternoon light catching the edges of her dark hair, she looked richer than anyone I had ever known. I did not know her name yet. Did not know she had been hired as a temporary caretaker for my grandmother, who was slowly losing her battle with time and memory. Did not know that my mother had specifically chosen her from an agency that promised discretion, and more importantly, workers who understood their place. What I knew in that moment was simpler and more dangerous. I knew that I was going to find a reason to talk to her. In my world, that decision alone was an act of rebellion. The Mercer family had rules older than the estate itself. Unwritten codes passed down like heirlooms nobody wanted, but everyone obeyed. Staff remained invisible. Boundaries remained sacred. And sons of the family absolutely did not notice the help, especially not help that looked like her. Solène moved toward the servants' entrance with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance. She did not look up at the mansion with wide eyes like most first-timers did. She did not seem impressed or intimidated by the columns and the ivy and the grotesque display of generational wealth. She just walked forward, like she had seen plenty of houses owned by people who had plenty of money, and none of it had ever meant anything to her. That indifference was the most attractive thing I had ever witnessed, and the most threatening thing my mother would ever encounter. If you are new here, welcome to Untold Lineage, where we tell the stories they never wanted you to hear. The ones buried under money and silence and family reputations protected at any cost. And if you are returning, you already know how these stories work. They get under your skin. They stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Hit subscribe and tap that notification bell now, because this one is going to haunt you. Let me tell you what Solène did to my life. She did not save it. That would be too simple, too clean. The kind of love story they sell you in movies where everything wraps up neat and the credits roll over a kiss. No, Solène destroyed my life. She took everything I thought I understood about loyalty, about family, about what I was supposed to want, and she burned it to the ground. She made me watch the flames. She made me choose whether to rebuild from the ashes or walk away from the only world I had ever known. The most beautiful destruction I have ever experienced. Because here is what nobody tells you about falling in love with someone you are forbidden to touch. It does not feel like falling at all. It feels like waking up, like you have been sleepwalking through your entire existence and suddenly someone flips a switch and you realize the dream you were living was actually a nightmare dressed in silk sheets and family crests. Have you ever met someone who made you question every rule you had been taught to follow? Someone who did not ask you to change, but whose very presence made you realize you had been living as a smaller version of yourself. A version designed by people who benefited from keeping you contained? That was Solène for me. In the Mercer family, love was never a choice. It was a transaction, a carefully negotiated merger between bloodlines and bank accounts. My mother had already selected 3 appropriate candidates for my eventual marriage: daughters of senators, heiresses to pharmaceutical empires, women who understood that wedding rings were just prettier versions of business contracts. I was 28 years old, and I had never once been asked what I wanted. until Solène looked at me across my grandmother's bedroom on her third day at the estate and asked a question so simple it nearly broke me. "Are you happy here?" 4 words. That is all it took. I could not answer her. My throat closed around the truth, like it was something shameful. Like admitting unhappiness was a betrayal of everything I had been given. The money, the name, the golden cage disguised as privilege. She did not push, did not pry, just nodded slowly like my silence had told her everything she needed to know. Then she went back to adjusting my grandmother's pillows with hands that were gentle in a way I had never seen inside these walls. And I stood there, hollowed out, wondering how a stranger could see me more clearly than anyone who shared my blood. What would you risk for someone who was not supposed to exist in your world? I asked myself that question every day for the next 3 months. Every stolen conversation in hallways where portraits of dead Mercers watched with disapproving eyes. Every accidental touch that sent electricity through my chest. Every moment I found an excuse to be wherever she was. My mother noticed. Of course she noticed. Eleanor Mercer had built her entire existence on noticing threats to the family's carefully constructed image. She had buried scandals that would have destroyed lesser dynasties. She had made problems disappear with a single phone call and a checkbook that had no bottom. And now her only son was looking at the help like she was the first sunrise he had ever seen. I will never forget my mother's face when she finally confirmed what she had suspected. That cold rearrangement of features, the way her smile stayed perfectly in place while her eyes went completely dead. "You will end this," she said. Not a request, not even a command, just a statement of fact, like she was describing gravity or the color of the sky. "There is nothing to end," I lied. She laughed. A sound like ice cracking. "Callum, darling, I know about the letters, I know about the garden, I know about the night you thought everyone was asleep." She leaned closer. "End it, or I will end her." What happened next at Mercer Estate would destroy reputations that took generations to build. It would expose secrets my family had killed to protect. And it would force me to make a choice that no amount of money could undo. But this story does not belong to me alone. To truly understand what happened at Mercer Estate, you need to hear it from the woman who walked through those iron gates with nothing but hope and desperation. You need to hear it from Solène. The iron gates of Mercer Estate stretched toward the Connecticut sky like fingers reaching for something they could never quite touch. I stood outside those gates for 7 full minutes, counting breaths, counting heartbeats, counting all the reasons I should turn around and find another way to save my mother's life. But there was no other way. I had spent 14 months proving that to myself. 14 months of job applications that vanished into digital voids. 14 months of interviews where hiring managers looked at my resume and saw potential, then looked at my face and saw something that made them uncomfortable. 14 months of watching my mother's body wage a war it was slowly losing, while I stood helpless on the sidelines. The medical bills had consumed everything first. Our apartment with the leaky faucet and the neighbor who played jazz too loud on Sunday mornings. Gone. Our savings account that we had spent years building, deposit by careful deposit, vanished. My car, the 10-year-old Honda that my father had given me before he left, sold for less than it was worth because desperation makes terrible negotiators. All of it. Every piece of security we had ever constructed. Fed to a machine that charged $400 for a single bag of saline and called it standard procedure. Now I was standing outside the home of strangers, preparing to become something I had never imagined. A maid. A servant. A person paid to be invisible in rooms larger than any space I had ever called home. The gates opened without greeting. No intercom crackle asking my name. No security guard stepping forward to verify my identity. Just a mechanical hum and the slow parting of iron bars that probably cost more than my mother's first round of treatment. The message was clear before I took a single step onto the property. I had already been observed, already been assessed, already been judged small enough, disposable enough, beneath the effort of a proper welcome. I walked through those gates anyway. The driveway stretched before me like a challenge. Pale gravel crunching beneath shoes. I had polished 3 times that morning. convinced that scuffed leather would somehow disqualify me from employment. I counted my steps to keep my nerves from swallowing me whole. 1, 2, 3. Maple trees lined the path on both sides, their leaves burning with October amber. Beautiful in the way that expensive things are always beautiful, maintained, curated, designed to remind visitors that nature itself bent to the will of whoever owned this land. 47, 48, 49. My bag strap dug into my shoulder. Everything I needed for the next phase of my life compressed into worn leather and desperate hope. 112, 113. The house emerged from behind a curve in the driveway, and I stopped walking. I stopped breathing. I stopped believing that the photographs in the job listing had been real. This was not a house. This was a monument. Grey stone walls rose 3 stories high, each level more imposing than the last. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, so tall they seemed designed to let God himself peek inside and admire the furniture. Ivy crawled up the eastern wing, with a kind of controlled wildness that suggested even the plants here followed orders. A fountain dominated the circular entrance, marble figures frozen mid-dance in water that caught the autumn light and scattered it like liquid diamonds. I had cleaned houses before. Apartments in Hartford where wealthy young professionals paid me to make their chaos disappear before their parents visited. Condominiums where divorced executives needed someone to maintain the illusion that they had their lives together. But this place existed in a different category entirely. This was wealth so old it had forgotten what money even meant. This was generational power built brick by brick over centuries, designed to intimidate anyone foolish enough to approach without an invitation. I was approaching with an invitation, a formal letter on cream-colored stationery, the Mercer family crest embossed in the corner, like a warning. 247 steps. That is how many it took to cross from the gate to the front entrance. I know because I counted every single one, using numbers to drown out the voice in my head screaming that I did not belong here. I did not belong here. But belonging had become a luxury I could no longer afford. $62,000. That number followed me everywhere, into my dreams, into my prayers, into the quiet moments when I allowed myself to envision a future where my mother lived long enough to see me figure out my life. $62,000 for an experimental treatment that insurance called investigational and therefore refused to cover. $62,000 that stood between my mother and the disease eating her from the inside out. $62,000 that I would never accumulate working retail jobs and cleaning apartments on weekends. Then the job listing appeared. I found it at 2 in the morning, scrolling through employment sites with the kind of manic energy that comes from complete desperation. Live-in caretaker position. Connecticut. Immediate availability required. The salary stopped my scrolling. Double what I had been earning at my previous job. More than double, actually, when you factored in free room and board. But the signing bonus made me sit up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake. Enough to cover the first round of treatment. Enough to buy my mother time while I figured out how to pay for the rest. I read the listings 17 times before I believed it was real. Discretion non-negotiable. That phrase appeared 3 times in the job description. At the time, I thought it meant they valued privacy. Rich people always valued privacy. They paid premium prices to keep their lives hidden from public consumption. I did not understand what discretion would actually require in the Mercer household. I did not understand what I was walking into. The front door opened before I could knock, and the woman standing in the doorway looked at me the way someone looks at a stain on expensive fabric, calculating how much effort removal would require, wondering if disposal might be simpler. She did not smile. She did not offer her hand. She did not say welcome or hello, or any of the words that normal people use when greeting someone for the first time. She simply looked at me with pale blue eyes that conducted a full assessment in under 3 seconds. My practical flats, purchased specifically because the job listing mentioned extensive walking, my pressed blouse, ironed twice that morning, my single bag, worn at the corners from years of use, my face, carefully composed into an expression I hoped conveyed competence and reliability. Everything about me, processed and filed into a category I would later learn, was labeled temporary. In Genevieve Mercer's world, people like me were always temporary. We arrived. We served our purpose. We disappeared when we were no longer useful. She had simply not decided yet which category of disappearance I would eventually occupy. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, met her gaze with the kind of quiet strength that comes from having already survived things that were supposed to destroy you. My mother was dying. My bank account was empty. My options had narrowed to this single doorway, and the woman blocking it like a dragon guarding treasure. I had nowhere else to go, so I smiled and pretended I did not notice the contempt radiating from every perfectly pressed fold of her designer clothing. "You are late." Her voice matched her appearance. Cold, precise, engineered to make the listener feel small without raising a single decibel. The listing said 3 o'clock. I kept my tone neutral. "It is 2:57. Something flickered behind those pale eyes. Surprise, maybe, or perhaps just recalculation. She had expected me to apologize, to stammer, to immediately accept fault for a transgression that did not exist. Instead, I had corrected her, politely, but unmistakably. "The bus from Hartford takes approximately 90 minutes. She said the bus the way someone might say the disease, complete disgust wrapped in perfect diction. "I assumed you would arrive early to demonstrate your commitment to punctuality. I would have arrived earlier if I had a car." No apology in my voice, just fact. The agency mentioned that transportation would be provided after the initial hiring period. Yes. She stepped backward, allowing me to enter without technically inviting me. "We will arrange something. Eventually." Eventually. The word hung in the air like a threat. A reminder that everything I needed would be distributed according to her timeline and her generosity. I crossed the threshold into Mercer Estate, and immediately understood that I had entered a world where the rules I knew did not apply. The foyer alone could have housed my childhood apartment 3 times over. Crystal chandeliers descended from ceilings so high they made me dizzy to contemplate. Marble floors polished to mirrors reflected my image back at me, small and dark against all that gleaming whiteness. Fresh flowers erupted from elaborate arrangements, their perfume so strong it bordered on suffocating. Everything screamed money, old money, the kind of wealth that had been accumulating interest since before my grandparents were born. And Genevieve Mercer stood in the center of it all, like she had grown directly from the marble itself. Silver blonde hair swept into a style that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Clothing that fit so perfectly it had to be custom made. Jewelry subtle enough to suggest old money, but present enough to remind you that she could buy and sell your entire existence without noticing the expense. I am Genevieve Mercer, technically an introduction, though it sounded more like a declaration of territory. I manage the household staff, the estate operations, and everything that happens within these walls. She paused, letting the weight of everything settle over me. "You will report directly to me, not my husband, not my son, not any of the other family members you may encounter during your employment. My son." She said those words with a particular emphasis that I did not understand yet, a warning embedded in casual mention. I would understand later. I would understand everything later. The agency assured me you were. Her gaze traveled from my practical flats to my pressed blouse, lingering on details I could not identify. Presentable. I suppose they were not entirely wrong. I had spent 3 hours choosing this outfit. 3 hours holding different blouses against my skin, trying to determine which shade suggested professionalism without ambition, competence without threat. Apparently, I had succeeded. Partially. "Thank you." I did not know what else to say. The compliment, if it could be called that, did not invite response. "Your room is in the east wing, 3rd floor, the servants' quarters." She began walking, clearly expecting me to follow. "You will eat in the kitchen with the rest of the staff. You will use the servants' entrances and staircases. You will not enter the family's private spaces unless specifically requested." I memorized each instruction, filing them away for later review. Rooms I could enter, rooms I could, doors that would open for me, and doors that would remain permanently closed. So many rules, so many invisible lines I would need to learn to see. Your primary responsibility will be caring for my mother-in-law. She requires another pause. Supervision. Her mind is not what it once was. The way she said it suggested inconvenience rather than grief, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. We climbed a narrow staircase hidden behind a panel in the main hallway, servant stairs, designed so that people like me could move through the house without disturbing the visual landscape of people like her. The previous girl lasted 6 weeks. Genevieve delivered this information without looking back at me. Her heels clicked against worn wooden steps that generations of servants had climbed before me. She had ideas about her role here, thought she could blur the boundaries. A small sound that might have been a laugh if it contained any warmth. She learned otherwise. I wanted to ask what happened to her. I wanted to know what blurring the boundaries meant and what learning otherwise involved. But something in Genevieve's tone suggested these were not questions I should ask. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In this house, everyone knows their place. She stopped on a landing, turning to face me directly. Those winter-colored eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle with warning. The family, the staff, the guests, everyone understands exactly where they belong and exactly how far they are permitted to reach. Her voice dropped to something almost intimate, almost kind, which made her next words land even harder. The moment someone forgets their place, they disappear. She let the word hang between us like smoke, quietly, completely, as if they never existed at all. I held her gaze, did not blink, did not let her see the fear that had suddenly wrapped cold fingers around my spine. I understand. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I am here to do a job. Nothing more. Good. She smiled for the first time, a smile that never reached her eyes. Then, we will get along beautifully. She continued up the stairs. I followed, but her words echoed in the narrow space, bouncing off walls that had absorbed similar warnings for over a century. Disappear. Quietly. Completely. At the time, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Rich people loved their dramatic flourishes. They enjoyed reminding the help that employment could end at any moment, for any reason, without consequence. I did not realize Genevieve Mercer had perfected the art of making people genuinely disappear, that she had done it before, more than once, to protect the family name, and the family secrets, and the family's carefully constructed image. I did not realize that within 3 months, she would attempt to make me disappear too. And I certainly did not realize that her son, standing at a window somewhere above us, had already decided I was worth fighting for, worth defying his mother for, worth burning his entire world down for. But those revelations would come later. For now, I simply followed Genevieve Mercer up the servant stairs, clutching my worn leather bag, thinking about $62,000 and my mother's treatment, and all the things I was willing to endure to keep her alive. I had no idea that survival would become the least of my concerns. My room in the servants' quarters was nicer than any apartment I had ever rented. That realization settled over me like a weight as I unpacked my worn leather bag, placing my few possessions into drawers that smelled of cedar and wealth. A private room with walls painted soft cream, an attached bathroom with fixtures that gleamed silver under recessed lighting, a window overlooking the east gardens, where roses still bloomed despite October's chill. Fresh linens covered the bed, white cotton so crisp it practically crackled when I touched it. Lavender sachets tucked into the pillowcases, their scent mixing with something else I could not quite identify. Money. That was the smell. Money, and the particular cleanliness that comes from having someone else scrub every surface until it shines. I sat on the edge of that pristine bed and looked around at walls that held no photographs, no memories, no evidence that anyone had ever truly lived within them. Nice. Comfortable. Certainly better than the cramped studio I had shared with my mother before the medical bills consumed everything. But it was still a cage. Just one, lined with silk. The bars were invisible here, made of expectations and rules. and the constant awareness that nothing in this room actually belonged to me. Everything could be taken away with a single word from Genevieve Mercer. The bed, the bathroom, the view of roses that someone else tended, all of it existed at her pleasure. And so now did I. I learned the rhythms of Mercer Estate within my first week. Breakfast at 7, served in the kitchen with the rest of the staff. Cook prepared eggs 3 ways and bacon that cost more per pound than I used to spend on groceries for an entire week. We ate quickly, efficiently. Conversation kept to minimum volume. Genevieve took tea at precisely 4 o'clock in the east sitting room. Not 4:05, not 3:55. 4 o'clock exactly, or consequences would follow. The previous housekeeper, a woman named Clara, who had lasted 11 years before her retirement, had once been late by 3 minutes due to a delivery complication. Genevieve had docked her pay for the entire week. 3 minutes. 1 week's salary. That was the mathematics of this household. Dinner at 8 in the formal dining room. A table that could seat 20, set immaculately for 1. Genevieve ate alone most evenings, surrounded by empty chairs and the ghosts of dinner parties that no longer occurred. I was never invited to serve her meals. That task fell to Henderson, the butler whose age and tenure granted him proximity the rest of us could not approach. My role was simpler, smaller. Care for the grandmother. Clean the spaces assigned to me. Remain invisible everywhere else. Margot found me on my 3rd evening, standing in the kitchen after the other staff had retreated to their rooms. She was the cook's assistant, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and hands that showed years of labor. The only person in Mercer Estate who had smiled at me without calculation behind it. "You look lost." She poured 2 cups of tea from a pot that was technically off limits after hours. Most new ones do. The first week, I am trying to learn the rules. I accepted the cup gratefully. There seem to be many of them. There are. And the ones they do not tell you about are the most dangerous. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table. "What has Genevieve told you about the family?" "Very little. She mentioned her mother-in-law. That is why I am here." Margot nodded slowly. "And Mr. Mercer, did she tell you about him?" "She mentioned a son, Callum, but she called him her son, so I assumed there was also a Mr. Mercer." Her husband, the pause that followed, told me everything before Margot spoke a single word. "There is no Mr. Mercer." Her voice dropped, as if the walls themselves might report this conversation. "Not anymore. Heart attack. 8 years ago. In his study, behind a locked door." Margot wrapped her hands around her teacup like she needed the warmth. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was far too late. "I am sorry." The words felt inadequate, but what else could I offer? "Do not be sorry for Genevieve. Be sorry for this house." Margot glanced toward the kitchen door, ensuring we remained alone. This place died with him. The life went out of it, the laughter, the warmth. All of it buried alongside Richard Mercer in that family cemetery behind the North Gardens. But Genevieve keeps it running. Genevieve refuses to let it rest. A bitter edge crept into Margot's voice. She maintains everything exactly as it was. The routines, the standards, the expectations, as if preserving the corpse might somehow bring back the soul. I thought of the grandmother I was hired to care for, the way her eyes sometimes cleared and she called me by names I did not recognize, the way she asked for Richard every morning and had to be told, gently, that Richard was gone. Maybe Genevieve was not so different from her mother-in-law, both trapped in houses haunted by men who no longer walked their halls. "And the son?" I asked carefully. "Callum?" Margot's expression shifted. "Complicated. Protective. 1 son, Callum, 28 years old." She sipped her tea. "He runs Mercer Holdings from the city, built the company bigger than his father ever did. Tripled the revenue, expanded into markets Richard never dreamed of touching." That sounds impressive. It is impressive. The financial papers write about him constantly. They call him visionary, ruthless when necessary, the kind of leader who could build empires if he wanted to. She paused, set down her cup. But Genevieve still treats him like a boy who has not earned his place at the table, still questions his decisions, still reminds him that everything he has was built on his father's foundation. I thought of my own mother, the way she had always supported my choices, even when they led nowhere, the way she had never made me feel small or unworthy. What would it do to a person, growing up under constant criticism, constant comparison to a dead man's memory? That woman loves two things, Margot continued, control and legacy. Her son is the only vessel for both. She guards him like a dragon guards gold. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted us. Distant, but unmistakable. Someone approaching the estate. Margot's expression shifted immediately, wariness replacing the warmth. Speaking of dragons and gold. She stood, gathering our teacups with practiced efficiency. Callum was not supposed to arrive until next week. Something must have changed. My heart rate increased for reasons I could not explain. I had seen photographs of Callum Mercer before arriving at the estate. The job listing had not included them, but curiosity had driven me to research the family I would be serving. Hours spent scrolling through business articles and society pages, memorizing faces I would need to recognize. In those photographs, Callum looked like a statue. Perfect posture, tailored suits that probably cost more than my yearly salary. Standing at podiums beside senators and executives, his expression carved from the same cold marble as his mother's mansion. I expected arrogance when I finally saw him in person, expected the kind of dismissive superiority that Genevieve wore like perfume. I did not expect him to look human. He came through the side entrance near the kitchen, the one staff used to avoid tracking dirt through the main foyer, shrugging off a wrinkled overcoat, loosening a tie that had clearly been yanked at repeatedly during whatever journey brought him here, exhausted. That was my first impression. Bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of money could cure. Shadows lived under his eyes. Tension knotted his shoulders into configurations that spoke of burdens I could not name. His hair, dark and slightly too long for corporate standards, looked like he had been running his hands through it for hours. Nothing like the marble man from the photographs. Nothing like what I had prepared myself to encounter. I had not realized I was staring until he noticed me. His gaze found mine across the narrow hallway, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or perhaps just the automatic assessment that came from living in a house where everyone wanted something from you. You are new, not a question. An observation delivered in a voice deeper than I had expected. Tired, but not unkind. Yes, sir. I straightened automatically, remembering all of Genevieve's instructions about proper posture when addressing family members. Solène, I started Monday. Solène. He repeated my name slowly, as if tasting it, tilted his head slightly, studying me with none of his mother's disdain. Just curiosity, genuine interest in the person standing before him rather than the role she filled. That is unusual. French origin? Most people assumed French when they heard my name, the elegant syllables suggesting European heritage rather than the truth. Haitian, actually. I kept my voice steady. Professional. My grandmother's name. Haitian. He nodded. Something that might have been a smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. Was she as brave as you? The question caught me off guard. I am sorry. Anyone who agrees to work under my mother's roof is either desperate or brave. He leaned against the wall, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. I am choosing to believe the latter. I did not know how to respond. The honest answer was that desperation had driven me here, not courage. That I would have accepted far worse conditions than comfortable rooms and 4 o'clock tea rituals if it meant saving my mother's life. But something in his eyes suggested he already knew that. Knew that most people who entered service positions did so because their options had narrowed to a single door. He was offering me dignity anyway, choosing to frame my presence here as strength rather than surrender. My grandmother was very brave. I found myself answering his original question without meaning to. She crossed an ocean with nothing but her name and her faith, built a life in a country that did not want her, and her granddaughter followed in her footsteps. I am not sure I would say that I would. He pushed off from the wall, and for a moment I thought he might say more. might continue this conversation that had already lasted longer than any exchange I had witnessed between family and staff. But the sound of heels on marble interrupted us. Sharp, deliberate, approaching with the kind of speed that suggested urgency or anger. Probably both. Callum. Genevieve's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Cold, controlled, carrying undertones of displeasure that made me want to shrink against the wall. You did not tell me you were coming. The transformation was immediate. Startling. The exhausted man who had leaned against the wall and called me brave straightened like a soldier called to attention. Rebuilt himself piece by piece into the marble figure from the photographs. Expressions smoothing into something unreadable. Shoulders squaring. Vulnerability disappearing behind walls I could almost see rising. Last-minute decision. His voice changed too. Harder. More clipped. The Brennan acquisition required personal oversight. You could have called. I did. Henderson took the message. They stared at each other, mother and son. Dragon and the gold she guarded. Something silent passing between them that I was not meant to witness. I should have left. Should have slipped away while their attention focused elsewhere. But my feet remained frozen to the marble floor. Trapped by forces I did not understand. Genevieve's gaze finally swung toward me. Glacial fury barely contained behind her perfect composure. Why are you still here? The question landed like a slap. Cold. Dismissive. Burning with implications I understood perfectly. Why was I standing in a hallway where family members conducted private conversations? Why had I engaged in dialogue with her son that lasted longer than the delivery of basic information? Why had I not disappeared the moment Callum Mercer entered my awareness? I was returning to the kitchen. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. I apologize for the interruption. Then return. I moved. Started walking. Kept my head down in the manner Genevieve preferred, eyes fixed on marble floors that reflected my diminished figure. But before I rounded the corner, something made me look back. Callum was watching me, not his mother, who was already speaking about schedules and obligations. Not the hallway ahead, where his room presumably waited. He was watching me leave, and in his eyes I saw something that should have terrified me. Something that should have sent me running for the gates I had entered 3 days before. Recognition, interest, the beginning of something dangerous. Something passed between us in that moment, a current of understanding that transcended the boundaries his mother had so carefully constructed, a silent acknowledgement that the world had just tilted on its axis in ways neither of us could name. I should have run. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed that this man represented complications I could not afford, that whatever I had seen in his eyes would lead somewhere I should not follow. But desperation kept my feet moving forward instead of away, and something else, something I did not yet have a name for, something that would eventually destroy us both, or save us. I was not sure which outcome frightened me more. Sleep would not come that night. I lay in my comfortable prison of a room, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move in patterns that meant nothing. My phone rested on the nightstand beside me, screen dark but heavy with the weight of the message I had received 3 hours earlier. My mother's treatment update. News that was neither good nor bad, just uncertain. The scans showed no progression, but no improvement either. The cancer remained exactly where it had been, stubborn and patient, waiting for something to tip the scales in one direction or another. The doctors called it stable. I called it a grey fog that had surrounded our lives for 14 months and refused to lift. Stable meant more waiting, more hoping, more watching the woman who had raised me exist in suspension between recovery and decline. Stable meant I needed to keep this job, needed to earn the money that would fund the next round of treatment, needed to remain invisible and obedient and perfectly positioned within the Mercer household. But stable also meant my mother was still fighting, still here, still waiting for me to call her on Sunday afternoons and pretend that everything was fine. I pushed the covers back. Sleep was not coming. Not tonight. Water. I needed water and movement, and something to occupy my mind besides the calculations I ran constantly. How many months of salary before the next payment was due? How many treatments remained in the experimental protocol? How many days I could afford to keep hoping? The hallways of Mercer Estate transformed after midnight. During the day, I had memorized specific routes, servant stairs and back corridors, and the paths that kept me invisible to family members. But darkness erased my mental maps, turned familiar corners into foreign territory. I made a wrong turn somewhere near the east wing. Found myself in a corridor I did not recognize, with doors I had never seen and portraits watching me with centuries-old judgment. Light spilled from beneath one of those doors, warm and golden, the kind of light that suggested a fire rather than electricity. I should have turned around, should have found my way back to the kitchen through safer passages, should have remembered every warning Margot had given me about knowing my place. Instead, I pushed the door open. The library stretched before me like something from a dream I had never allowed myself to have. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covering every wall, leather furniture worn soft by decades of use, a fireplace where embers still glowed orange against the darkness, and Callum Mercer, sitting in an armchair by that dying fire, a glass of amber liquid cradled in his hand. He looked up when I entered, not surprised, not angry, just tired in that bone-deep way I had seen the first time we met. Solane, my name, quiet, almost grateful, as if he had been waiting for someone to interrupt his solitary vigil and had not dared to hope anyone would come. Please. Sit. He gestured toward the chair opposite his, an invitation that violated every rule his mother had established. Unless my mother has convinced you that sharing oxygen with me is above your station. The bitterness in his voice surprised me. Sharp and raw, like a wound that had never properly healed. I should have declined, should have apologized for the intrusion and retreated to my room and pretended this encounter never happened. Instead, I sat. The leather chair embraced me with warmth it had absorbed from the fire. I tucked my feet beneath me without thinking, then froze, realizing the informality of the gesture. Callum noticed, said nothing, just watched the fire with eyes that seemed to be looking at something far beyond this room. Silence stretched between us. The grandfather clock in the corner marked seconds that felt like hours. Fire crackled softly, wood settling into ash. Then, finally, he spoke. "You are up late." I could not sleep, neither could I. He swirled the liquid in his glass. "I never sleep well in this house, never have. Too many ghosts, too many expectations hiding in the walls. Then why come back?" The question escaped, before I could stop it. Too personal, too direct. The kind of question staff did not ask family members. He turned to look at me then. Really look, as if seeing past the uniform and the role and the boundaries that should have kept us safely distant. Because sometimes the thing that haunts you is also the only thing that feels like home. The words landed somewhere deep in my chest, resonated with frequencies I recognized. My mother is dying. I did not mean to say it. The confession escaped without permission, pulled from some hidden place by the intimacy of firelight and late hours, and the way he had just offered me a piece of his own pain. She has cancer, ovarian, stage 3 when they found it. They caught it early enough to fight, but late enough to make the fight expensive. He listened without interrupting, without the performance of sympathy that people usually offered when illness entered conversation. Every morning, I check my phone before my eyes are fully open, waiting for the call, the one that tells me the fight is over, that I wasted precious time in a house that does not want me while she was dying without me beside her. Then why are you here? The same question he had asked me in the hallway, but different now, weighted with understanding he had not possessed before. Because the treatment that might save her costs more than I would earn in 3 years. My voice cracked slightly. I forced it steady. Because sometimes the thing that haunts you is the only thing that might save someone you love. He laughed softly, not cruelly, with recognition. We are both trapped then, paying prices we never agreed to, for debts we never created. Sounds like life to me. Sounds like hell. Same thing, some days. He raised his glass toward me, a toast, offered to the darkness between us, to shared prisons. Then I had nothing to toast with. My hands were empty, curled in my lap like sleeping birds. But I raised my empty hand anyway, lifted it toward his glass in a gesture that was silly and improbable and somehow exactly right. He smiled. Not the polished expression from photographs. Something real, something broken. Something that recognized my own brokenness and found comfort in the reflection. The grandfather clock struck 3. The fire collapsed into embers. And in that gesture, that silly, improbable gesture, something changed between us. Permanently. Irreversibly. Something that had no place in a house built on boundaries and hierarchy and the careful separation of people into categories that should never intersect. We talked until dawn began to lighten the windows. About nothing important and everything that mattered. About the weight of expectations and the cost of survival and the loneliness that came from living in worlds that demanded constant performance. When I finally returned to my room, I did not sleep. But for the first time in months, the grey fog lifted just enough to let me breathe. Margot caught my arm before breakfast the next morning. Her fingers pressed hard enough to leave marks, pulling me into a storage closet before I could register what was happening. The door closed behind us, plunging us into darkness, broken only by a strip of light from beneath the frame. "Be careful." Her voice barely reached a whisper. Urgent, frightened in a way I had never heard from her. "I saw your door was open past midnight. I saw where you went." My heart stopped, restarted at double speed. "Margot, it was not. I do not care what it was or was not." She cut me off with a sharpness that surprised me. "I do not need explanations. I do not want details. What I need is for you to understand something that could save your life." The word hit me like cold water. Life. Not job. Not position. Life. Genevieve watches everything. Margot's grip on my arm tightened. Every conversation, every glance, every breath that comes too close to her son. She has eyes in places you cannot fathom. I got lost. The excuse sounded weak even to my own ears. I was looking for the kitchen. I found the library by accident. Margot's expression remained unchanged, unimpressed by explanations that would not matter to the woman who ruled this house. "There are no accidents in this house." The words landed like a verdict. Every movement is observed, every pattern noted, every deviation recorded and analyzed. You think you found that library by chance. Someone unlocked doors that should have been locked. Someone made sure the hallway leading there was accessible. I thought of the lights spilling from beneath the library door. The fire still burning at 2 in the morning. Callum sitting in that chair as if he had been waiting. Had it been an accident? Or had forces I did not understand arranged our collision? The last girl, the one who lasted 6 weeks. Margot's voice dropped even lower. She learned the hard way that Genevieve sees everything. What happened to her? The question had been building since my first day. The previous employee who had ideas about her role, who thought she could blur the boundaries, who disappeared quietly, completely, as if she had never existed. Margot's silence stretched for a long moment. Then she released my arm and reached for the door handle. Some questions are safer left unasked. She slipped out of the closet before I could respond. Left me standing alone in the darkness, my arm still burning where her fingers had pressed. What exactly had happened to the previous girl? The question would haunt me for weeks, and when I finally learned the answer, I would wish I had never asked. Despite Margot's warnings, or perhaps because of them, I found myself drawn into Callum's orbit over the following weeks. Conversations in hallways that lasted moments longer than necessary. Shared glances across rooms where we should not have acknowledged each other's existence. Evenings in the library that stretched into small hours, filled with words and silences that meant equally much. I told myself it was harmless. Friendship, nothing more. 2 lonely people, finding comfort in each other's company within a house that offered none. But even as I constructed these defenses, I knew they were lies. He had begun finding reasons to visit the estate more frequently. Board meetings that required Hartford proximity, documents that needed his grandmother's signature, family obligations his mother could not question without admitting she suspected something worse. The excuses accumulated, and Genevieve pretended to believe them. 3 weeks after our first library encounter, Callum found me in the East Garden during my afternoon break. The October roses were finally dying, their petals scattered across the stone paths like discarded confessions. I had come here to clear my head, to remind myself of the boundaries I was supposed to maintain. He appeared beside me without warning. No footsteps on the gravel, no announcement of his presence. Just suddenly there, close enough that I could smell his cologne and the coffee he had been drinking. My father planted these roses. His voice carried the weight of memory, heavy and tender at once. When I was 7, he taught me how to prune them. Said every man should know how to care for beautiful things. We walked together through the dying garden. Slowly. No destination in mind. Tell me about him. I should not have asked. Should not have invited intimacy that would only make everything more complicated. Your father. Callum was quiet for a long moment, collecting words perhaps, or deciding how much truth to share. He was kind, genuinely kind, in a way that made no sense given how he was raised. The Mercer family was old money, old expectations, old cruelty disguised as tradition. But my father rejected most of it. He built Mercer Holdings. He built it from a small textile company into a global empire, worked himself into the ground doing it, sacrificed his health, his peace, his time with me, a pause. And in the end, the only thing he could not escape was my mother's control. Control. She managed everything. The social calendar, the household, the way we presented ourselves to the world. In public, my father was the powerful businessman. In private, he deferred to her in everything that mattered. We stopped beside a stone bench covered in fallen leaves. Callum did not move to clear them, just stared at the bench as if seeing someone sitting there who no longer could. He loved her. The words came slowly. That was his tragedy. He gave her everything she wanted, and she turned it into a weapon. Against him? Against everyone. His jaw tightened, including herself. I thought of Genevieve, the frost in her eyes, the control she maintained over every aspect of this estate, the way she had looked at me that first day, calculating how much effort my removal would require. Your mother is not evil, Callum. He turned to look at me, surprise flickering across his features. I do not know her well, I continued, but people do not become dragons without reason. Something made her this way. His expression softened, in a way I had not seen before. You are right. She is not evil. She is afraid. He sat on the bench despite the leaves. After a moment, I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, far enough that we could pretend we had not chosen proximity. My mother came from nothing, a factory town in Pennsylvania where hope went to die. Her father drank. Her mother worked 3 jobs, and still could not keep food on the table consistently. She fought her way out, scholarships, connections, calculated choices that moved her step by step into circles where people like her were never supposed to belong, including your father. He nodded slowly. She met him at a charity gala. He was 25 and already running the family company. She was 22 and working as an assistant to one of the event planners. That sounds like a romance. It was. At first. She loved him, I think. In her way, his voice carried an edge of uncertainty, but she loved security more, and once she had it, she became terrified of losing it. I understood that terror, knew what it felt like to build something from nothing and watch the world threaten to take it away, knew the lengths desperation could drive a person to, and now that he is gone, security means control. I finished the thought for him. Control over the company, control over the legacy, control over me. The words hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to name, and over anyone who might threaten that control. His eyes met mine, direct, unflinching, carrying a warning wrapped in something that looked dangerously like longing. Exactly. The warning was clear. I understood it perfectly. Genevieve Mercer would destroy anyone who threatened her grip on her son, anyone who distracted him from the legacy she had fought her entire life to secure, anyone who made him question the path she had carefully constructed, anyone like me. But beneath the warning, I heard something else, an ache that echoed my own, a loneliness that recognized its reflection in my eyes. He was asking me to understand the danger. He was also asking me not to leave. You should tell me to go. My voice came out quieter than I intended. You should tell me to find the kitchen when I cannot sleep, to look at the floor when we pass in hallways, to remember that I am staff and you are family, and that is all we can ever be. I should, but you are not going to. No. He reached toward me, then stopped, his hand hovering in the space between us. I am not. The afternoon light filtered through dying rose bushes, casting patterns on the stone beneath our feet. Somewhere in the house, Genevieve was probably watching, calculating, planning, and here we sat, two people who should never have found each other, building something fragile in a garden planted by a dead man. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But I did not move away. If you have made it this far, you know this story is only beginning. Whatever happens next between Callum and me, whatever his mother has planned, whatever secrets this house still holds, I need you here for all of it. Subscribe now and turn on those notifications, because the next part of this story changes everything. December arrived at Mercer Estate like a held breath finally released. The first snow of the season transformed the grounds into something almost innocent. White powder covered the manicured gardens, softened the sharp edges of stone pathways, turned the imposing grey mansion into something that resembled the Christmas cards wealthy people sent to each other. Almost beautiful, almost peaceful, almost enough to make me forget that I was living inside a powder keg with a lit fuse. 2 months had passed since the garden conversation. 2 months of careful distance during daylight hours and stolen moments in the library after midnight. 2 months of learning the rhythm of Callum's breathing and the particular way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something I said. 2 months of pretending that whatever was growing between us could somehow exist without consequences. I carried a basket of laundry across the east grounds, taking the outdoor path because the servants' corridors were being cleaned, and Genevieve had made it clear that visible dirt on my shoes was a termination offense. Fresh linens pressed against my chest, still warm from the industrial dryers in the basement. The weight steadied me against the December wind. My shoes, practical flats that had served me well for months, were not designed for Connecticut winter. I did not see the patch of black ice until I was already falling. The basket left my arms first. Linens scattered across the snow like surrendered flags. My body followed, tilting backward, arms windmilling uselessly against physics that did not care about my dignity. I braced for impact, for the cold shock of frozen ground, for the bruises that would bloom across my back and remind me for days that I should have been more careful. But the impact never came. Arms caught me, strong and sudden and warm through my thin coat, pulled me upright before I could register what was happening, steadied me against a chest I had learned to recognize even with my eyes closed. Callum, are you all right? His voice came from somewhere very close to my ear, concerned, urgent, carrying undertones that had nothing to do with my near fall and everything to do with the fact that we were now standing chest to chest in broad daylight. I nodded, found myself suddenly unable to form words. His arms remained around my waist, holding me steady, holding me close. The cold air between us filled with frozen exhales that mingled and disappeared into December sky. I became aware of details I should not have been noticing. The way his coat smelled of cedar and something citrus, the slight stubble along his jaw that suggested he had not shaved that morning. The proximity of his lips to mine, close enough that the slightest forward motion would eliminate the distance entirely. Solane, my name on his lips, soft, almost reverent. Carrying the weight of everything we had not yet said to each other, he was going to kiss me. Right here, in the open, where anyone could see. I should have pulled away, should have remembered every warning Margot had given me, should have thought about my mother's treatment and my job, and the very real possibility that Genevieve Mercer would destroy my life without a second thought. But his eyes held mine, and in them I saw the same reckless hope I felt building in my own chest, the same willingness to risk everything for a moment that might never come again. his head tilted slightly, moving closer, and then a shadow fell across the snow. Whatever he was about to say died before it reached his lips. His body stiffened against mine. His arms dropped away as if my skin had suddenly become burning coals. I turned, already knowing what I would see. Genevieve stood in the doorway of the east wing, watching. Her face revealed nothing. Perfect composure maintained even now, when she had just witnessed her son holding a servant in his arms with intentions that could not be misinterpreted. Not a flicker of anger, not a flash of surprise, not even the cold disdain I had learned to recognize as her default expression. Nothing. But her eyes told a different story. Frozen fury burned behind that careful mask. The kind of rage that did not need volume or violence to destroy. The kind that calculated and planned and waited for the perfect moment to strike. She looked at me the way a predator looks at prey that has wandered too close to her offspring. Then, without a single word, she turned and disappeared back into the house. The silence she left behind was worse than any accusation. Callum released a breath I had not realized he was holding. Go. Now. Pretend this never happened. Callum. Please. His voice cracked on the word. I will handle her. But you need to not be here when she decides to speak. I gathered the scattered laundry with hands that would not stop trembling. Forced myself to walk rather than run toward the servant's entrance. Felt his eyes on my back the entire way. Neither of us spoke again. The envelope appeared under my door sometime after midnight. I found it when I returned from checking on Callum's grandmother, who had been having a difficult evening and needed soothing through her confusion. Cream-colored stationery, expensive and thick, resting on the worn carpet of my small room. No name on the outside. No indication of sender. I opened it with fingers that still trembled from the afternoon's events. Expected termination. Expected threats. Expected the consequences that should have followed what Genevieve had witnessed. Instead, I found a single piece of paper covered in elegant handwriting. Your mother's treatment has been anonymously funded. All current and future costs will be covered in full. No questions asked. No repayment required. Consider it a gift from someone who understands what it means to watch a mother suffer. No signature. But I knew exactly who had sent it. Callum. It had to be Callum. The phrasing about watching a mother suffer. He knew about my mother's illness. He knew the exact amount needed, and he had resources his mother could not track. $62,000. The number that had haunted my sleep for over a year. The weight that had pressed against my chest every time I checked my bank account or spoke to my mother's doctors. Gone. Lifted. Paid by someone whose generosity I had done nothing to deserve. I should have felt relief. Should have collapsed onto my bed and wept with gratitude and joy. Instead, I felt the walls of my comfortable prison tighten around me. Was this gift a lifeline, or was it a chain disguised as kindness? Now, before we continue, I need to ask you something. Have you ever received a gift that felt more like a question than an answer? Something that seemed generous on the surface but left you wondering what the true cost would be? Something that made you question whether kindness could ever exist without strings attached? Drop your answer in the comments, because what Callum did next changed everything. And if you are watching this far, you are clearly invested in what happens to us. Do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now, let us keep going, because this is where things get dangerous. I should have kept my distance after that night. Should have understood the envelope for what it was. A lifeline offered across an ocean I could never safely cross. A gift that came with expectations I could not name but should have recognized. Should have packed my worn leather bag and walked away while walking was still an option. But grief and gratitude and loneliness make cowards of us all. Or perhaps they make us brave in all the wrong ways. 1 week after the snow. 1 week after Genevieve's silent witness. 1 week after the envelope that changed everything and nothing at once. Genevieve left for a charity gala in the city. Some annual event that required her presence and her checkbook and her performance of generosity for causes she cared about only when cameras were watching. The charity gala was an obligation she could not escape without raising questions she preferred not to answer. Her surveillance systems remained active, of course. Cameras, staff reports, the usual methods. But she could not be everywhere. And that single night of physical absence was all we needed. She would be gone until the following afternoon. 24 hours of freedom, the longest stretch I had experienced since arriving at Mercer Estate. I should have spent those hours sleeping, should have used the absence of surveillance to simply breathe without calculation. Instead, I found myself in the library at 11 o'clock, watching firelight dance across Callum's face, while conversation wound through territories we had never dared explore before. What would you do if money did not matter? His question came without warning, interrupting a comfortable silence that had stretched for several minutes. If legacy did not matter, if every expectation simply vanished. I considered the question seriously, let myself envision a life unburdened by medical bills and family obligations and the crushing weight of survival. I would go home. The answer surprised me with its certainty. To Newark, to my mother. I would open a bookstore, maybe, something small, something that belonged to me. Tell me about it. Old building, exposed brick walls, worn wooden floors that creak when customers walk across them, comfortable chairs by windows where people can sit and read for hours without being asked to buy anything. The vision expanded as I spoke. Details I had never consciously considered spilling from some hidden place inside me. Coffee, but not expensive coffee. The kind my mother used to make. Strong enough to wake the dead. Cheap enough that people could afford seconds. Sounds perfect. Sounds impossible. He moved closer on the leather sofa we shared. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. Close enough that I could see the gold flecks scattered through his green eyes. Nothing is impossible, Solène. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. We just convince ourselves it is because believing otherwise is too terrifying. And what terrifies you, Callum? The question escaped before I could stop it. Too intimate, too direct. The kind of question that demanded honest answers. His hand found mine. Gentle, questioning, asking permission for contact that we both knew would change everything. Right now, the thought of never knowing what this could become, his fingers interlaced with mine, warm against my cold skin, anchoring me to a moment that felt suspended outside time. We should not do this. My voice came out strangled. Your mother, my job, everything that makes this impossible. I know. It will destroy us. Probably. Then why? His free hand rose to my face, traced the line of my jaw with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Because some destructions are worth choosing. I should have pulled away. Every rational thought in my head screamed warnings. My mother's treatment, funded by money that came with invisible strings. My job, the only income standing between survival and catastrophe. The woman who would return tomorrow and immediately sense that something had altered in her carefully controlled domain. All of it. Every logical reason to stand up and walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. I did not move. His lips met mine, soft at first, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull back and restore the boundaries we had just demolished. But I did not pull back. My hand found the back of his neck, drew him closer, answered his question with an answer that required no words. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate and long overdue, became the confession of every glance we had stolen across crowded rooms, every accidental touch in hallways, every library conversation that had danced around this moment without ever quite arriving. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the fire had burned down to embers, and I understood what Margot had warned me about, what Genevieve had spent years guarding against, what the previous girl had discovered too late. In this house, love was the most dangerous act of all. We did not speak for a long moment after, just sat together in the dying firelight, hands still intertwined, breathing the same air we had finally stopped pretending we did not want to share. I'm not sorry. Callum's voice broke the silence. Quiet, but certain. I should be, but I am not. Neither am I. My mother will try to destroy this. I know. She might succeed. I turned to face him fully, let him see in my eyes everything I could not yet articulate. Then let her try. Let her do her worst, because whatever happens next, at least we will know we were brave enough to reach for something real. He laughed softly. That broken, beautiful sound I had come to treasure. You sound like someone who has already decided the ending does not matter. I sound like someone who has spent her whole life playing it safe and watching safety crumble anyway. I squeezed his hand. Maybe the only real safety is choosing the things that scare us most. Dangerous philosophy. Dangerous woman. He kissed me again. Slower this time, as if we had all the time in the world, and neither of us believed it for a second. Outside, snow continued to fall on Mercer Estate. Inside, two people who should never have found each other built something fragile and impossible and true. We both knew it could not last. We chose it anyway. For 3 months, we lived in careful shadows. January bled into February. February surrendered to March. The snow melted and returned and melted again. And through it all, Callum and I constructed a hidden world within the walls of his mother's kingdom. Stolen moments in the library, after Genevieve retired to her suite. Quiet conversations in the East Garden, where his father's roses waited for spring to remember them. Notes passed through the grandmother's room, where my legitimate duties provided cover for brief exchanges that sustained us between longer meetings. We learned the rhythm of the household's surveillance and slipped between its beats like dancers who knew the music by heart. Henderson retired to his quarters at precisely 10:30 every evening. The security cameras in the East Wing had a blind spot near the garden door. Margot, who suspected everything but said nothing, occasionally arranged her schedule to provide us windows of privacy she pretended not to know about. We built our impossible thing brick by invisible brick, and with each passing week, I learned pieces of Callum that the photographs and business articles had never revealed. "Thank you," I said one night when the silence had stretched long enough for truth. "For my mother's treatment." He did not pretend to misunderstand. I would do it again. 1,000 times. "You did not have to." "I know. That is why it mattered." He feared becoming his mother. This confession came on a February night when ice storms had trapped us inside for 3 days straight. Genevieve had retreated to her suite with a migraine, leaving the library unguarded for precious hours. I watch myself sometimes. His voice carried the weight of shame he rarely allowed anyone to witness. In meetings, in negotiations, I hear her words coming out of my mouth, her tone, her willingness to sacrifice people for profit. "You are not her, not yet." He stared into the fire. "But the potential lives in me. I feel it, the capacity for coldness, for control, for convincing myself that the end justifies any means. The fact that you fear it means you are fighting it, or it means I am losing." I took his hand, held it until his breathing steadied. "My mother used to say that we become our parents only if we stop paying attention. The moment you stop questioning yourself is the moment you surrender. Your mother sounds wise. She is, in all the ways that matter." His guilt extended beyond his mother's shadow. He carried the weight of inheriting a fortune built on his father's sacrifice. Every dollar in his accounts, purchased with hours Richard Mercer had stolen from his family to give to his company. I did not earn any of this. He gestured vaguely at the library, the estate, the empire that bore his name. My father worked himself into an early grave. My mother schemed and calculated and sacrificed her humanity, and I just inherited the results. What would you do differently? I do not know. That is the problem. Walking away feels like betraying his memory. Staying feels like becoming part of the machine that killed him. There might be a third option, which is, use it for something he would have wanted. Transform the machine from the inside. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. My father wanted me to be happy. A sad smile crossed his face. He told me once when I was 15 that all the money in the world meant nothing if you could not share it with someone who made you laugh. Did he make your mother laugh? In the beginning, yes. Before she became more interested in what he provided than who he was, his secret dream emerged slowly over those winter months. The fantasy of walking away, becoming someone who had never heard the name Mercer, living simply, anonymously, in a place where legacy meant nothing and connection meant everything. He would never do it. We both knew that. But the dream sustained him through board meetings and family obligations, and his mother's constant pressure to become something harder than he wanted to be. In turn, he learned pieces of me. My mother's laughter, recorded on my phone so I could hear it whenever nights grew too quiet. I played it for him once, a 30-second clip of her responding to a joke I no longer remembered. He listened with an expression that made my heart ache. She sounds like sunlight. She is, even now, even sick. She refuses to let the darkness win. My father's absence shaped me in ways I was still discovering. He had left when I was 7, disappeared into a new life that did not include the family he had started. For years I had wondered what I had done wrong. What flaw in my character had driven him away? You did nothing wrong. Callum's voice carried certainty I wished I could absorb. Some people are not built to stay. It says everything about them and nothing about you. I know that now. Mostly. The doubt never fully disappears. It just learns to be quieter. He held me while I cried. The first time I had allowed anyone to witness that particular grief since childhood. I told him about my certainty that real love required a courage I was not sure I possessed. Every time I start to believe in something, it falls apart. My voice was muffled against his chest. My father, my career plans, my mother's health. I have learned to hold everything loosely because gripping tight just makes the loss hurt more. And us? Are you holding this loosely? The question deserved honesty. I am trying to, but you make it difficult. Good. It is not good. It is terrifying. Also good. He tilted my chin up to meet his eyes. Terror means you care enough to be afraid of losing something. I will take terror over indifference any day. We were building something impossible. A relationship constructed on stolen moments and whispered confessions, and the constant awareness that discovery could come at any second. We both knew it could not last. Genevieve's surveillance had tightened since the snow incident. Margot's warnings had grown more urgent. The grandmother occasionally said things in her confusion that suggested even she sensed the ground moving beneath her household. The walls were closing in, and somewhere, in a future neither of us could yet see, a consequence was already forming that would force everything into the light. We both knew it could not last, but we pretended otherwise, because sometimes pretending is the only courage available to those who have already risked everything. Margot found me in the servants' kitchen on a Tuesday morning in early April. I was reaching for a biscuit from the breakfast tray, my stomach churning with the particular nausea that had become my unwelcome companion for the past 2 weeks. The smell of coffee, once comforting, now sent waves of queasiness through my body. You have been sick 3 mornings this week. Her voice stopped me mid-reach. Casual observation wrapped in something heavier, something knowing. And you have been avoiding the kitchen whenever I am cooking fish. My hand froze above the biscuit, suspended in air like evidence I could not retract. I am fine. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Something I ate, probably. The rich food here takes adjustment. No. Margot stepped closer. Close enough that only I could hear what came next. You are pregnant. The word dropped into the silence between us like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward, disturbing everything they touched. I opened my mouth to deny it, to laugh it off, to do anything except confirm the terror that had been building in my chest for 14 days. But Margot's eyes held no judgment, no accusation, no triumph at having discovered a secret I had barely admitted to myself. Only sorrow. Deep, profound, anticipatory sorrow. Oh, honey. Her voice cracked on the endearment, a mother's tone, though she had no children of her own. You have no idea what you have done. The words landed like a verdict, final and terrible, and confirming every fear that had kept me awake since the first mist cycle. Since the morning sickness began. Since my body started sending signals I could not ignore, no matter how desperately I tried. Margot, please. My voice dropped to a whisper. I do not know what to do. There is nothing to do, not anymore. She glanced toward the kitchen door. ensuring we remained unobserved. Genevieve will find out. She always finds out. And when she does, she did not finish the sentence. Did not need to. I thought of the previous girl, the one who had lasted 6 weeks, the one who had ideas about her role, the one who had disappeared quietly, completely, as if she had never existed at all. What happened to her? The question I had been avoiding for months finally escaped. The previous girl. What really happened? Margot's face closed like a door slamming shut. Some things are better left buried. I need to know. Please. If I am going to survive this, I need to understand what I am facing. For a long moment, I thought she would refuse, would walk away and leave me drowning in uncertainty. Then she spoke, quietly, quickly, words tumbling out as if she needed to expel them before courage failed. Her name was Elena. She was young, pretty, smart enough to know better but lonely enough to ignore what she knew. And Callum? Not Callum. Margot shook her head. A cousin, visiting for the summer. But the principle was the same. Staff does not touch family. Family does not touch staff. Genevieve's rules. Absolute and immutable. What happened when Genevieve found out? Elena was gone within 12 hours. Her belongings shipped to an address that did not exist. Her references destroyed. Her name erased from every record of employment. But she survived. She left. The silence that followed my statement told me everything. Margot, she survived, right? I do not know. Margot's voice had dropped to something barely audible. I truly do not know. She called me once, 3 months later, crying, terrified, saying Genevieve's lawyers were threatening her with things that did not seem possible. And then she stopped calling, stopped existing as far as I could tell. No social media, no forwarding address, nothing. The nausea in my stomach had nothing to do with pregnancy now. I tell you this not to frighten you, Margot continued. I tell you because you need to understand. Genevieve Mercer does not lose. She does not compromise. She does not allow threats to her family's legacy to survive. And a baby would be a threat. It was not a question. But Margot answered anyway. A baby would be the ultimate threat. Physical evidence of boundaries crossed, living proof that her son chose someone she did not approve, a claim on the Mercer fortune that no amount of lawyers could fully extinguish. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach. Protective, maternal, responses I had not known I possessed rising from somewhere ancient and fierce. I will not let her hurt my child. Your child. Margot repeated the words with something approaching wonder. You have already decided, then, to keep it. I had not realized I had decided until the words left my mouth. But now, standing in a kitchen that smelled of coffee I could no longer stomach, I knew with absolute certainty. Whatever grew inside me was mine. Callum's, ours, and Genevieve Mercer would have to go through me to reach it. Does he know? Not yet. You need to tell him. Tonight, before someone else notices what I noticed. She was right. I knew she was right. But as I walked away from that conversation, my hand still pressed against my flat stomach, I wondered if telling Callum would save us or simply accelerate our destruction. I found him in the library at midnight. Our library now, claimed by months of whispered confessions and stolen hours, and a love neither of us had planned, but both had chosen anyway. The fire burned low in the grate, casting shadows that danced across leather-bound books and worn furniture. He looked up when I entered, smiled that broken, beautiful smile I had come to treasure above all others. You look tired. I need to tell you something. The smile faded. He set down the book he had been reading, giving me his full attention. What is it? I crossed the room on legs that did not feel entirely steady, sat beside him on the leather sofa that had witnessed our first kiss, took his hand in mine because I needed something to anchor me to this moment. I am pregnant. The words hung in the air between us. 2 words, 8 letters. A universe of consequences contained in a single breath. He did not speak, did not move. For one terrible moment, I saw his mother in his eyes. The calculation, the self-preservation. Centuries of Mercer legacy rising up to swallow whatever humanity we had built together in these shadow hours. I prepared myself for retreat, for excuses, for the sudden discovery that what we had shared was not strong enough to survive this particular complication. Then his hand found my cheek, gentle, trembling, warm against skin that had gone cold with fear. "I love you, Solène." "Callum." "No. Listen to me." He drew closer, his eyes finding mine with an intensity I had never seen before. "I've spent my entire life being what my mother needed me to be. A vessel, a vehicle for her ambition, an extension of her will wearing human skin." His voice cracked on the words, raw emotion breaking through walls he had spent years constructing. "I have never, not once, chosen something for myself, not my career, not my home, not even my friends, who were all carefully vetted and approved before I was allowed to cultivate them." His forehead pressed against mine, close enough that I could feel his breath, close enough that I could see the tears gathering in eyes that had learned long ago to hide such vulnerability. "But I am choosing this. I am choosing you. I am choosing us. Your mother will never accept this." I needed him to understand, needed him to see clearly what we faced before promises were made that might prove impossible to keep. "You know that. She will fight with everything she has, and she has more resources than we can possibly match. I know. She will try to destroy me, destroy our child, destroy anything that threatens the legacy she has spent her life protecting." "I know. Then how can you?" "Because I am not asking her permission." His hands cupped my face, steadied me, forced me to meet his gaze. "I am not a child seeking approval. I am a grown man claiming the life I want to live. And that life includes you, includes our baby, includes everything we have built in these stolen hours. She will never stop fighting us. Then we will never stop fighting back." His thumb traced my cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "Together, on our terms. Refusing to disappear the way she wants us to." The conviction in his voice was almost enough to make me believe. Almost. "I am going to tell her tomorrow." The words landed like a physical blow. Tomorrow, not someday, not eventually. Tomorrow, on my terms, he continued, before she can discover it through her surveillance networks. Before she can spin this into something it is not. Before she can plot and scheme and prepare countermeasures. "Callum, you cannot." "I have already arranged a meeting, 8 in the morning. Her study." He spoke with the decisive certainty of a man who had made up his mind and would not be moved. "By tomorrow afternoon, the world will know the truth, or at least my mother will know, and she will have to decide whether she wants to keep a son who refuses to be controlled or lose him entirely. And if she chooses to lose you." The question hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to examine too closely. "Then I will grieve the mother I never really had." His voice softened. "And I will build a new family, a real family, with you." He pulled me close, held me against his chest, while our futures hung in the balance. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. I promise you that. Whatever my mother does, wherever this leads, you will not face it alone." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. His arms around me felt like safety. His promises felt like shelter from the storm I knew was coming. His heartbeat against my ear felt like home in a way I had never experienced before. But as I lay awake in my own bed that night, counting the hours until morning, a quiet voice whispered what I did not want to hear. "Genevieve Mercer has spent a lifetime making people disappear. Elena, the previous girl, gone without a trace, erased from existence by a woman who viewed inconvenient people as problems to be solved rather than humans to be considered. What makes you think you will be any different?" The baby inside me, still too small to show, still too new to feel, represented everything Genevieve feared. A claim on the Mercer legacy that came from someone she had not chosen. Evidence that her son had slipped beyond her control. She would fight. That much was certain. The only question was whether Callum's love would prove stronger than his mother's rage. I placed my hand over my stomach and prayed to whatever power might be listening. Let him be strong enough. Let us both be strong enough. Let this child survive the war that morning would bring. Let me pause here for a moment, because what is about to happen is the reason I had to tell this story. If you are feeling anxious right now, if your heart is beating a little faster, if you find yourself holding your breath without realizing it, then you understand what Celine felt that night. The hope and the terror existing in the same breath. The desperate need to believe that love could win against power, that courage could triumph over cruelty, that the life growing inside her might somehow survive the storm bearing down on them all. Before we witness what Genevieve did next, take a second to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when morning comes. Now, let me show you what happened when the sun rose grey and cold on the day everything unraveled. The sun rose grey and cold on the day everything unraveled. I woke before dawn, having barely slept. My body hummed with exhaustion and anxiety, and the particular alertness that comes from knowing you are about to walk into a battle you cannot win. The uniform I pulled from my closet had been pressed 3 times. Obsessive attention to wrinkles that did not exist, something to occupy my hands, while my mind spiraled through every possible outcome of the morning ahead. I checked my reflection in the small mirror above my dresser. A woman stared back at me. A woman I barely recognized. She wore the same face I had worn for 27 years, but something fundamental had altered behind her eyes. She was carrying a life that had not yet begun to show. She was terrified of a future she could not predict, and she was walking into the stronghold of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of destruction. I smoothed my uniform one final time, squared my shoulders, lifted my chin the way my grandmother had taught me to do when facing situations that demanded more courage than I possessed. Then, I walked out of the room that had never truly been mine and into the corridors of Mercer Estate. 7:45. I moved through the house with footsteps that echoed louder than usual. The staff was already awake, attending to morning duties, but the hallways felt emptier than normal, as if the estate itself sensed that something significant was about to occur. The door to Genevieve's study loomed at the end of the west corridor. Dark oak, heavy brass handles, designed to intimidate anyone foolish enough to seek audience with the woman who ruled from behind it. Callum was already inside, had been since 8 minutes before 8, when he had walked past me in the hallway with a look that said everything his lips could not. "I love you. I will fight for us. Trust me." I had nodded. Once. Quickly. Before continuing on my assigned tasks as if this morning was no different from any other. 7:52. The voices began, muffled at first, indistinct syllables filtering through oak doors that were supposed to be soundproof. But the tone was unmistakable. Genevieve, Callum, both raised in ways I had never heard before. I positioned myself in the hallway adjacent to the study, close enough to hear fragments, far enough to plausibly claim I was simply passing through on legitimate business. Completely unacceptable. Genevieve's voice, sharp as broken glass. "My choice, not yours." Callum, matching her volume for the first time in his life. "Everything I have built." The matriarch, fury barely contained. "Never asked you to build anything." Her son, finally fighting back. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat marking seconds that stretched into eternities. My hands clasped together at my waist, hiding trembles I could not control. 7:55. Something crashed inside the study, glass breaking, heavy impact against wood. 7:56. Silence, more terrible than the shouting that had preceded it. 7:57. Genevieve's voice, low now, too low to decipher words, but the tone carried through the oak doors with perfect clarity. Threat, promise, absolute certainty that she would prevail. 7:58. The study doors burst open. Callum emerged first. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. A cut on his cheek bled slowly, as if something thrown had found its mark. But his eyes burned with a fire I had never seen. Determination forged in the heat of whatever had just occurred behind those oak doors. The look of a man who had finally chosen his own path and would not be turned from it. He saw me in the hallway. His expression softened for just a moment. Then Genevieve appeared behind him. She looked exactly as she always did. Perfectly composed, immaculately dressed, not a single silver blonde hair out of place despite the chaos that had clearly erupted in her study. But her eyes found me with the precision of a missile finding its target. Pale fury, absolute certainty, the look of a woman who had just declared war and fully intended to win. You, one word, carrying the weight of everything she now knew, everything she now planned, everything she would do to protect the legacy her son had just threatened. She smiled, and in that smile, I saw the destruction she was already planning. For me, for Callum, for the child we had created together. This is far from over, she said, to both of us, to neither of us. I promise you that. Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking on marble, already plotting the war that would consume us all. Genevieve Mercer stood in the threshold of her study like a woman transformed. I had seen her cold, had seen her calculated, had seen her dismiss me with the casual cruelty of someone swatting an insect. But I had never seen her like this. The mask she wore so carefully had cracked. The composure she maintained with religious discipline had shattered. What remained was something raw and primal and more terrifying than anything I had witnessed in 7 months beneath her roof. Fury, pure, undiluted fury that contorted her elegant features into something almost unrecognizable. Her eyes found me in the hallway, tracked across my body with the precision of a weapon seeking its target, moved from my face to my shoulders, to my midsection, with knowledge that turned my blood to ice. She knew. Not suspected, not wondered, knew. The way her gaze settled on my stomach made clear that whatever Callum had told her in that study had included every detail. The pregnancy, the relationship, the future we had foolishly believed we could build together. All of it laid bare before a woman who had spent her entire life ensuring nothing threatened her carefully constructed kingdom. You, one word, carrying the weight of accusation and contempt, and something that sounded dangerously close to hatred. You have been in my house for 7 months. She stepped forward, each word punctuated by the click of heels on marble, eating my food, sleeping under my roof, accepting my generosity. Another step, closer. Now, close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes that expensive creams could not fully hide. And all this time, you have been scheming, calculating, positioning yourself for exactly this moment. I never. Do not interrupt me. Her voice cracked like a whip, silencing my protest before it could fully form. Mother. Callum appeared behind her, the cut on his cheek still bleeding. He had followed her from the study, but she moved faster, positioned herself between us with the strategic precision of a general securing territory. Do not. She did not turn to face him, did not take her eyes off me for a single second. Do not you dare defend her, not after everything I have sacrificed, not after everything I have built, not after the life I have spent constructing a future worthy of your father's memory. She stepped closer still, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something French and expensive and utterly soulless, the scent of wealth without warmth, power without mercy. Did you really think you could trap my son? The question came out almost conversational, as if she genuinely wanted to understand the psychology of a creature she considered beneath contempt. Did you really believe I would allow a maid, a servant, a woman who arrived at my gates carrying everything she owned in a single bag, to carry the next Mercer heir? I did not trap anyone. The words escaped before I could stop them, fueled by an anger I had not realized I possessed. Callum and I. There is no Callum, and you. She cut me off with surgical precision. There is my son, the heir to the Mercer legacy, the culmination of everything his father built, and everything I have protected since his death. Her eyes narrowed, glacial and utterly remorseless. And there is a problem I need to solve. That is all you have ever been since you walked through my gates. That is all you will ever be. A problem, an obstacle, A temporary inconvenience that I will remove with the same efficiency I have applied to every other threat this family has faced. She turned to face Callum then. The movement was deliberate, calculated, designed to exclude me from a conversation she had already decided would determine my fate. This is fixable. Her voice dropped to something almost reasonable. A mother counseling a wayward child. A businesswoman proposing a sensible solution to an unfortunate complication. Quietly, discreetly, without scandal or consequence. Mother, we will send her away with enough money to keep her silent, enough to fund whatever life she wants to build far from here, far from you, far from any claim on the Mercer name. She reached toward him, placed a hand on his arm with something that almost resembled tenderness. And in 6 months, when this has all blown over, you will marry Victoria Ashford the way we discussed, the way your father and I always planned. No one ever has to know about this unfortunate lapse in judgment. The phrase landed like a slap. Lapse in judgment. That was what she called the love we had built, the child we had created, the future we had dared to dream together. A lapse in judgment to be erased, a mistake to be corrected. A problem to be solved with money and silence, and the complete destruction of everything I had allowed myself to hope for. No, Callum's voice rang through the hallway like a bell tolling the end of an era. Clear, certain, carrying a defiance I had never heard from him before. Genevieve blinked. For the first time since I had known her, I saw something other than certainty in her eyes. Something that looked almost like fear. Excuse me? I said no. He stepped around her, moved to stand beside me with a deliberation that left no room for misinterpretation. His hand found mine, warm and sure, and trembling only slightly with the magnitude of what he was doing. This is not a lapse in judgment. This is not a problem to be solved. This is not an inconvenience to be erased with your checkbook and your lawyers and your infinite capacity for making people disappear. His fingers interlaced with mine, holding on, as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly lost all stability. This is the only real choice I have made in 28 years. He looked at me then, just for a moment. But, in that moment, I saw everything he felt, everything he feared, everything he was willing to risk. Selene is carrying my child, and she is going to be my wife. Silence fell. Absolute, deafening. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes and explosions, and the complete restructuring of everything you thought you understood. Genevieve stood frozen, a statue carved from fury and disbelief, processing words that should have been impossible from a son she had spent 28 years molding into compliance. I watched her face transform. Shock came first, the genuine surprise of a woman who had never seriously considered that her son might refuse her, that the vessel she had shaped and controlled and filled with her own ambitions might one day choose to pour himself out. Then fury, familiar and terrible, the rage of a dragon discovering that her gold has been stolen, and finally, something far more terrifying than either, calculation, the cold, precise machinery of a mind moving from confrontation to strategy, from immediate victory to long-term campaign. From winning this battle to winning the war she had already decided to wage. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. Very well, 2 words, delivered with the pleasant tone of someone conceding a minor point in a casual conversation. You have made your choice, Callum. She smoothed her perfectly pressed jacket, adjusted a cufflink that did not need adjusting. Small gestures that suggested she had already moved past this moment, already begun planning what came next. Now let me make mine. She turned, walked toward her study with steps that echoed like countdown, reached for a phone she kept on her desk. A private line I had never seen her use, reserved for calls that required absolute discretion and absolute deniability. Mother, whatever you are planning, I am planning to protect this family. She did not look back, did not raise her voice, did not betray any emotion beyond the calm certainty of a woman who had never lost a battle she considered worth fighting. The way I always have, the way I always will. She disappeared into her study. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. And somewhere on the other side of that door, a war began that would consume everything we had built and everyone we loved. We just did not know it yet. I stood in that hallway with Callum's hand in mine, and his promise still echoing in the hollow spaces of that monstrous house. My wife. He had called me his wife, in front of his mother, in the most direct challenge to her authority that he had ever mounted. I should have felt triumphant, should have felt the glow of victory that comes from facing your enemy and watching someone you love choose you over them. But all I could feel was the certainty that Genevieve Mercer had spent a lifetime building walls around her son. And she was not going to let a maid from Newark, a woman who had arrived at her gates with nothing but a worn leather bag and desperate hope, tear them down without a war. The phone call she was making behind that closed study door would be the first strike in a campaign designed to destroy me completely. I did not know that yet, but I felt it, the way you feel a storm approaching before the first clouds appear on the horizon. Something terrible was coming, and nothing Callum had promised could protect me from it. I did not know about the private investigators Genevieve would hire within the hour, men who specialized in finding secrets people thought they had buried, men who could trace every mistake I had ever made, every vulnerability I had ever revealed, every weakness that could be exploited to destroy my credibility and my character. I did not know about the medical records that would be illegally accessed, my mother's treatment history, her medications, her prognosis, information that should have been protected by every privacy law in existence, but would somehow find its way into Genevieve's hands within 48 hours. I did not know about the family secrets that would be weaponized, the father who had abandoned me, the jobs I had lost, the desperate months I had spent scrambling for survival before finding the listing for Mercer Estate. Every piece of my history that could be twisted into evidence that I was exactly what Genevieve would claim, a gold digger, a schemer, a woman who had targeted a vulnerable man for his fortune. I did not know that her definition of making her choice would involve lawyers and media contacts and a cruelty so calculated it would make her previous treatment look like kindness. We should leave. Callum's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. Tonight, before she has time to execute whatever she is planning. And go where? Anywhere. My apartment in the city, a hotel, another country if necessary. He pulled me closer, wrapped his arms around me as if physical proximity could somehow shield us from the storm his mother was already summoning. I have resources she does not control, money she cannot touch. We can disappear if we need to. Your grandmother, my job, my mother. The reasons we could not simply run piled up faster than I could voice them. We cannot just vanish, Callum. We have people who depend on us, responsibilities we cannot abandon. Then we stay and fight. He pulled back enough to meet my eyes. Together. Whatever she throws at us, whatever weapons she deploys, we face it together. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination could overcome resources and ruthlessness. But I had seen what Genevieve Mercer could do, had heard the stories of people who had challenged her and lost, had watched Elena disappear into a silence that might have been voluntary or might have been something far worse. I thought that confrontation was the battle. The moment in the hallway when Callum stood beside me and declared his intentions. The moment when Genevieve's mask cracked and her fury spilled through. The moment when decades of carefully constructed control shattered against the reality of a son who had finally chosen for himself. I thought we had faced the worst. I was wrong. That confrontation was not the battle. It was only the declaration of war. The real fight, the one that would cost me nearly everything, was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, I would learn exactly how far Genevieve Mercer was willing to go to protect her legacy, how many people she was willing to hurt, how much destruction she was willing to cause. I would learn that the woman who had spent a lifetime making inconvenient people disappear had no intention of letting me become the exception. And I would learn that love, no matter how real, no matter how chosen, no matter how desperately needed, was never enough on its own. Love was just the reason you fought. The outcome depended on something else entirely. I used to think love was enough, that if two people chose each other, truly chose each other with full knowledge of the costs and consequences, the world would eventually make room for them, that the universe rewarded courage and punished cruelty, and ensured that those who fought for something real would ultimately find their way to safety. But I learned something in that house, something I carry with me still, something that changed the way I understand every relationship I have witnessed or will ever witness. Love is never enough. Love is just the reason you fight, the motivation that gets you out of bed when your body begs for surrender, the fuel that keeps you moving when every logical calculation says you have already lost. The outcome, whether you win, whether you lose, whether you survive, that depends on something else entirely. It depends on how much you are willing to sacrifice, how much pain you are willing to endure, how many pieces of yourself you are willing to lose in service of something you believe matters more than your own comfort or safety. And in the months that followed, I would lose almost all of them. Almost all of the pieces I thought made me who I was. Almost all of the certainties I had clung to since childhood. Almost all of the hope I had carried with me through the gates of Mercer Estate. I did not know it then, standing in that marble hallway with Callum's hand in mine and his mother's threat hanging in the air like poison. I did not know that within 2 weeks private investigators would be interviewing my former landlords, asking questions designed to paint me as unstable, unreliable, the kind of woman who would do anything to escape poverty. I did not know that within a month, anonymous tips would reach tabloid journalists. Whispers about the maid who had seduced one of Connecticut's most eligible bachelors. Stories that would twist everything Callum and I had built into something sordid and calculated. I did not know that Genevieve would find my mother, would send lawyers to her hospital room with documents designed to terrify and confuse, would threaten to withdraw the anonymous funding that had been keeping her alive, would use the woman I loved most in the world as a weapon against me. That was the cruelest blow, the one that nearly broke me completely. But I am getting ahead of myself. Standing in that hallway, all I knew was that the woman I had feared for 7 months had just declared war on everything I held dear, and I had no idea how to fight back. In the next part of this story, you will see what Genevieve did with her choice. You will see the investigators she hired and the questions they asked. The neighbors from my childhood who suddenly found themselves interrogated about events that happened decades ago. The employers who received calls from anonymous sources asking about my character and my history and my motivations. You will see the threats she made when subtlety failed to achieve her goals. The lawyers who appeared at my mother's hospital with paperwork designed to terrify and confuse. The media contacts who began asking questions about the maid who had seduced one of Connecticut's most eligible bachelors. You will see the moment she tried to destroy not just my relationship with her son, but my relationship with my own mother. The cruelest weapon she deployed. The one that almost broke me completely. You will see how far a woman will go to protect her legacy. And you will see whether love, whether Callum's promise, whether everything we had built together in stolen hours and whispered confessions could survive the war she waged. What comes next? I am still not sure I have recovered from it. But you deserve to know, and I am finally ready to tell you. If you have made it this far, you are not just watching a story. You are invested. You care about what happens to Solène and Callum. You need to know whether Genevieve wins or loses, whether the baby survives, whether love proves stronger than the forces arrayed against it. And I promise you, what comes next will be worth every minute you have spent here. But I need something from you first. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell. Because the moment part 2 drops, you want to be the first to know. You do not want to miss a single second of what happens when Genevieve Mercer declares total war on a woman who has nothing left to lose. Drop a comment telling me what you think will happen. Will Callum keep his promise? Will Genevieve succeed in making Solène disappear? Will the baby survive? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, someone who understands what it means to fight for love against impossible odds. Someone who knows that the battles worth fighting are rarely the battles you are guaranteed to win. And whatever you do, come back for part 2, because trust me, you have not seen anything yet.